Welcome and good evening to the 44th edition of Burlington and Beyond. We're certainly very pleased that you could join us tonight. We have a very special program. We have two individuals, and Adam Sinesi and myself, part of the panel of Burlington and Beyond. But we have two individuals who are very well qualified to speak on tonight's issue, which is healthcare. It's a contentious issue. There have been a lot of back and forth on it, and I suspect that a lot of people do not have enough information with regard to what is going on. So we've asked Mr. Steve Stam, town meeting member, and Mr. Ernie Zabalotny, also a town meeting member, to fill us in with some of the material that we should know and exactly what is happening in town. Do you want to say a couple of words about yourself, Steve?
Oh, sure.
And Ernie?
Basically, I became a town meeting member in 2012 when I retired from a successor to a company called Stone & Webster Engineering Company, where I was since the early 70s. So I am basically in management, in big projects, and company finances, and engineering. So I've got a wide background, familiar with healthcare issues and costs in the private sector, and in town meeting, we've been looking at healthcare costs and the issues in the public sector as it affects our tax rates.
Very good. Ernie?
I date back to the same time that Steve did at Stone & Webster, although the areas of interest largely had to deal with first-of-a-kind energy projects. We do have the same general interest in how you look at problems, how you define potential solutions, and how you go about the problem of initiating discussions and looking at how one might get to those solutions. And this healthcare element of our tax problems or our tax bill is no different than any other. It's a national problem, it's a state problem, and it is a local problem. And unless we're all involved in understanding at least the major parts of it, we're going to continue having contentious discussions about it without resolution. And our, Steve and my interest is to generate discussions to get to a resolution, at least in town.
You've touched a little bit on my first question, which was why do you think the people, the taxpayers of Burlington, this is directed to both of you, why do you think the taxpayers of Burlington should be concerned about this issue? And this is addressed to those citizens out there, and hopefully a whole bunch of other citizens. I'm sorry, go right ahead. What do you think?
Okay, not only should, are we interested, but you should be interested, because this is a large part of your tax rate. And I didn't even realize how much. It turns out that when you add up all of the health insurance costs for the town, it comes out to over $13 million a year now, and it's increasing. That's 11% of our overall budget for the town. It is increasing at a rate greater than our cost of living. It's increasing at a rate greater than the increase in our taxes. So basically, when you look at that, it's also increasing at a rate faster than your salaries for the people out there that are still working. So when you look at that, just those facts alone should tell you that it's only time and we're going to be in a difficult situation. The only thing that has kept us out of that situation today is the fact that Burlington is growing, the industrial and commercial sections are growing, and it's that growth that has fueled the additional costs. However, when that growth slows or stops, we're going to start feeling the pinch.
Yeah,
Right.
the graph then gets to be, instead of just going up rapidly, it means it's coming down rapidly. If I might
Sure,
add,
go right ahead.
part of the growth that's unusual is that there's a significant portion of the town's health insurance costs, which are really discretionary. We pay or we cost share at a ratio that is in excess of that which the state mandates as a requirement. We have to provide, if we provide any coverage at all, 50% of the total premium. And actually, we provide 70% for current employees and 80% for retirees. That number alone is a significant chunk of that increasing cost, or that $13 million. There are a number of other things that we do that are somewhat discretionary, and the question is, should we really be that indiscreet about our discretionary expenditures?
Yeah. Does Burlington have a plan at this time?
Not to my knowledge.
There is not. I have not seen a plan that basically adequately addresses how we're going to cover these costs in the future. We have a plan for what's called OPEB, and we'll get into that in the future. OPEB is an acronym that everybody should become familiar with.
So how have we gotten to
Yeah.
this point? Has it been simply hit or miss, or depending on who's in office, or?
Burlington is fortunately very well off financially right now. And we've been able to cover these costs so far, and they haven't been increasing all that fast in the past, but they picked up over the last 10 years.
Please. Who would be tasked with creating a plan to put into place to curb these costs in the long term?
I would think that they'd form a committee that would have several of the boards on town participating on it.
Ultimately, since town meeting is responsible for the budget and authorizes money expenditures, it should start with town meeting, and it should include the treasurer's office. It should include whoever is currently involved in discussing contracts with the various unions that employ or that employees belong to, and it should also involve some interaction with the people who are actually providing the insurance, because that's a mystery that changes daily now as elements of the Affordable Care Act get introduced. Right now, the insurance companies are desperately trying to find out how to best manage that. Of the four major ones in the state, two of them lose money regularly. Two make it. These are for-profit insurance companies. Obviously, things are changing fast.
I guess so. So if town meeting is tasked with overseeing this, and town meeting technically has the power to form a subcommittee to address this issue, how would we spearhead that issue, as all of us on this panel tonight are town meeting members?
That's correct. All of us are town meeting members. Somebody would have to bring up a warrant article to create a committee, and to, if it needed a budget, to fund it.
Gee, I have never heard that before. I think that that is doable. It is not something that is remote to
Yeah, and
a warrant
I
article.
mean, I realize town meeting is one body that could do it. I would have thought it would have come from the town manager's area, the selectman, the treasurer, but it needs to involve school committee as well. So maybe town meeting is the right place.
The only reason I suggest town meeting is that it can be begun by any town meeting member who feels that this is an appropriate thing to do. You develop the interest and make sure that all of the people in the town that should be involved get to be involved, but in a structured fashion. There's no reason why it has to come for, say, the Ways and Means Committee, and there's no reason why this should be led by the Treasurer's Department or the town administrator. He's got lots of things to do already, and there is not necessarily anybody who is an experienced practitioner of the insurance business in town. We take our lead from whatever the insurance companies tell us what we should be doing.
Do you have a an idea as to, or an opinion at least, as to what the balance should be with regard to what the town pays and what the individual pays? Is that, how do we come by determining that?
You know, my thought on that is, right now, as Ernie had just said, the town pays 70 or 80%, depending on if it's an active individual or retired individual, of the health insurance costs. If you look at the private sector, typically the private sector is in less, or in some cases substantially less than 50%. State law now, as Ernie has also said, requires a funding of 50%. That's something that probably should be looked at. The current percentage is a holdover from the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
when when the salaries of town employees were a lot less than the salary of the private sector, and so the benefits were better. The salaries have increased substantially since then, and in fact, we'll talk about it. They're greater than the private sector on the average.
Yeah.
And the health benefits and other benefits are still better, and they've never been equalized.
Yeah. Ernie, what do you
The-
think?
I was answering several questions while you were talking, but really, it's the 50% that's in the state law, I think, comes out of the 50% cost share that everybody who pays for Social Security and Medicare taxes, and that happens to be about 83% of the population who are employed, and it's always been that 50-50 split. They keep on changing the amount that you have to, but it is an employer-employee split. For private sector people who are qualified for Social Security and Medicare, they end up having to pay a premium, which, if you look at what's supposed to be covering 80% of the total medical cost, is less than half of what the private sector insurance to complete the other 20% is. It never makes sense to me whatsoever. But when you start funding a basic healthcare program for the great majority of people in the country who are paying into it on a 50-50 basis, that's the foundation period. And as town employers, we should be also looking at that as a basic level. What the unions have done in the past for private companies as well as public unions is to try to get that to be higher than that 50-50 cost share as an extra benefit to account for at least some perceived lower than market rate wages. That's a long time since ago, and I've just been reading some studies that were looked at for how prevalent that discrepancy is, or the premium that states pay for their employees, and it ranges to up to 25% when you include the healthcare benefit. And the single largest component of that is not retirement pay, but it is health insurance.
Yeah.
That constitutes as much as 21% higher overall wage. If you look at the hourly value that Mass Budget Center, and this is just in this state, the average value of health care to public employees is, I think, wrote it down somewhere, it's $4.83 per hour. And if you happen to be in the private sector, the average value of the health insurance is $1.97 an hour. If you happen to be working for a big company that provides you a relatively good health insurance plan, it's like $3.70. You start multiplying 1 million odd people by $1 an hour, at 2,000 hours, you're talking about serious money differences.
Very serious.
And that basically describes the flow of money from the private sector to the public sector employees.
How do we fare? I don't know if you've had a chance, but how do we fare, that is Burlington, with some of the surrounding communities? Is there a difference that you're aware of, generally speaking?
There are a couple differences. Most of the communities don't pay 80%. of the health care benefits. They pay between 60 and 70. But they're going to be reassessing them as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't hurt to be on the fringe or with the curve or ahead of the curve
Yeah.
here. So.
Yeah.
What do you think has prompted the discrepancy
a-
in Burlington versus other communities, other surrounding communities that do
Well,
provide a lower rate?
There's a number of reasons for it. If you went to Lexington's website, for example, and looked at what their health insurance costs are and what the rates are for the various plans, first thing I noticed is I couldn't recognize one of the companies that provided their plans. The second thing I noticed was that all of their rates for each of the groups were higher than those that the town of Burlington pays for its employees and retirees. And at least in the retirement case, I know that what's available to me is significantly lower than the rate that we are paying for our retirees. And part of that is in what I'm trying to find an answer to the mystery of, is what does a retiree who has been a public employee and never contributed to Social Security, how does he pay his Medicare premium at this time? For those of us who get Medicare, that's deducted from our Social Security payments. The government does not send out a monthly bill. So it's conceivable, I've not been able to get anybody to provide an answer for this, so it's conceivable that a $1,200 per year difference between private rates and the ones that towns end up paying reflect an element of the contract that the insurance company has with Medicare, that they're basically collecting the employee's share of the Medicare costs. That brings up another problem that says we're not only paying for the supplemental insurance at a 70 or 80% rate, we're also paying the Medicare costs at a 70 or 80% rate, and that clearly is a significant improvement over what it is as private sector people we get to do. I don't know that there is a law that requires somebody, an employer, to pay a retiree's share of Medicare costs. If there is, it'd be great, but they would still keep on deducting it from my Social Security check.
Part of the answer to that question is I don't know that people have really looked at that far ahead. Can I have slide 5? And I'd like to point out something.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, and basically, this slide looks at what happens with the total medical costs, and this is on how much you as a taxpayer are going to see as an average taxpayer for your total medical costs, and which is the blue line, over the next till 2045, and the rate of increase that is seeing if we don't do anything. The red line is the other post-employment benefits, which basically is retirement medical costs, and these are costs per household, so it comes out to per taxpayer. So they're growing, and we're going to be paying up on the order of $2,500 per household of your taxes will go to the medical cost pass in 2025. Now, can I have slide, the next slide, which is 6?
There you go.
This is a similar data, looking at it with slightly lower escalation rate, and this is total for the town instead of for the individual taxpayer. And you can see that right now we're paying slightly less than $15 million a year for the total medical benefit costs, but it increases to almost $50,000 a year by 2045. So there is a tremendous increase, even at the lower rates of 3 to 3.5% per year escalation. So the total town budget, by the way, when I did this, was in 2015 was $125,000. So that gives you an idea of how those growths are compared with today's budget.
125 million.
125 million. Thank you.
Right.
No.
Yeah, it is a. Can you fill us in on OPEB, other post-employment benefits, and where the town is with OPEB at this particular moment?
The basically other post-employment benefits, which is a host of things, but the main contributor is retirement insurance costs, and the retirement insurance costs picture was changed a couple of years ago when basically the General Accounting Service came out with recommendations that towns assume the overall liability for a 30-year period for all of their other post-employment benefit costs and show that on their annual financial statement. And basically, now people start looking at it and say, oh, you know, for Burlington at that time, it was over 100 million. It's been since reduced to 70 million.
Actually, it was 142 at one time.
Oh,
Then it went to 100, now it's 70.
Okay.
And I figure if we wait a couple of years, it'll be down to zero. Then we
no.
won't have to do
And
anything about it.
That's all playing with statistics and inflation rates, and that got it, you know, most of that savings or reduction. But the bottom line is, now the question is, who should pay for that, and how do you pay for it, and when do you pay for it? And basically, the town is paying for that. The current practice is the town wants to put money into a trust fund, and it's already put about 2.5 to 3 million in the trust fund, and it wants to put money in at $500,000 a year, increasing by 9%, 9.3% every year, and they want current taxpayers to fund this trust fund. The purpose is to have it in 30 years so that that trust fund can pay for, out of that trust fund,
So we currently are
funding a trust fund to pay for future expenditures of post-employment benefits. And so the earnings on that fund, if they meet the
suggested.
the suggested amounts,
Yeah.
would pay for that. And so what that means is, right now as a taxpayer, you're not only paying for today's benefits for today's employees and today's retirement people, but you're paying for tomorrow's retirement
Yeah.
people. And so to me, that there are a couple of minor benefits to that, but to me that just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
You know, we don't do that on other liabilities. For example, bonds. We don't have to put money aside to pay for bonds. You know, that's why we borrow the money.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is quite similar to what people vote for in a number of towns called the Community Preservation Act, where people decide that they will increase their taxes from 1% to 3%. The state will then, when some of that money is spent, will provide 30, it used to be 50% cost share for expenditures related to historical, housing, parks, other infrastructure programs within a town. That kind of, it's basically a bank account, which the state will add to if you go about making that decision. That at least is actions which will yield benefits, current benefits to current taxpayers, and you know that it's basically available to everybody. When this program started, I have to admit that I was, without thinking, a voter for it. And when you start thinking about it, it's basically an immoral exercise, causing me to pay for past sins, current liabilities, and future taxpayers' benefits. To make it better, I went through the problem of looking at how many years that this would come out, so that the goal that was announced would, the trust fund would pay for all of the health care required costs for the town. That would occur in approximately 35 years, and because of the tax reduction that would occur at that time, if I live another 42 years, the program will come out level cost. I will start making personal gains on that investment. It's no different than any other investment plan except for the timeline. Normally, you have investment plans that span 10, 20 years, the length of a mortgage, etc. This one, you have to live a little bit longer than the average lifespan in order to be able to see any benefits. That's why I call it immoral. It's not the kind of thing that should be done. And the last point I would make is this unfunded liability we meet and fund on an annual basis without fail. If we're funding it on an annual basis without fail, then it's not an unfunded liability.
Liability anymore, right? Yeah. Good
There's an
point.
organization called the Post Office, the
Yeah.
U.S. Post Office, that Congress is required to do this on a 75-year basis. They make money every year, and they lose huge quantities because of this kind of plan. And basically, they will be out of business eventually because of this plan. I think the same thing will occur to the town.
Two other points. One, there is currently, and I don't expect there will ever be a legal requirement saying that the towns have to fund this trust fund.
You anticipate one?
I don't. I
You
do not.
Okay.
Secondly, if you look at the current plan, at 9.3% an increase a year, you're paying over $4 million by the a year at the end of this.
Wow.
In addition,
Yeah.
in addition to paying the 13 million escalated to whatever number
Right.
that will be in the future, which is not an immodest amount of additional cost burden. I translate this, roughly speaking, for the 8,000 residential taxpayers as 50,000 per million, or $50 per million, excuse me. And once you start running up the number that Steve mentioned before, $2,500 that we pay as the share, our share of the overall healthcare cost, you know that something is out of whack when you're paying more for your share of the retirees and workers than you should be paying for your own health insurance as an individual. Obviously, this is being stretched, but the only way I can make it at least a little better is that those employees who live in this town are also paying that tax, so that the benefit that they're looking at isn't quite as big as we might make it out to be. So you have to recognize that, but it is still a significant difference from what people in the private sector are going to be able to access.
One more point, if I
Sure.
can.
Go ahead.
All this is interconnected. Okay? If we were to reduce the amount, the percentage that the town pays for retirement benefits, then our OPEB liability would go down drastically.
Yeah.
And we would have a much better time of explaining why it's not a problem.
And the 4% tax increase that we have seen for the past, or thereabouts, for close to 4% some years, I think for the past 5 or 6 years, as I recall, would also, in most likelihood, would diminish accordingly, I think. At least I would hope that it would
should
affect
be able
that.
to go down as well, yes.
Yeah. As you indicated
Yeah.
a little bit earlier, the thing that is carrying us right now is the fact that we are still in a growth situation. Once those extra taxes that are coming in now do not come in, then it's going to be a,
Well, it's
a
not
much
that
more
the taxes
serious
won't come
bump
in, but they won't continue to increase.
to increase.
And that will get us into a Proposition 2.5 situation
Yeah.
when we don't have growth.
It seems to me that there
Which
was...
I think is a handy thing to do, because when you get there, then you're going to start paying attention to the problem. And we won't until that occurs. If you look at what has happened to our taxes over a long period, you mentioned 4%. Some of the data that we just saw from the school budget, over the last 10 years, the school budget is 4% per year. It's almost as though it was a requirement. The town side, which is 50% of the budget, is regularly 1 or more % lower than the school budget, so that the overall budget increase over that 10-year period is closer to 3 rather than 4. But the fact that part of the bulk of the services outside of are growing at a lower rate means that they're fairly effective, but we also have been not spending as much on infrastructure as we could, and that number can significantly rise over the next 5 to 10 years. In which case, we're going to be growing at a number that is considerably above inflation, and is considerably above the rate of median household income growth in Burlington or in the state or in our county, depending upon which one you want to compare it with. And that says that those costs are continually getting more expensive for you. And the only thing that may save us on an individual basis, if our property values increase at a faster rate, and it's tough to go to the grocery store with your property value,
With
by the
your
way.
property.
So you can, if you want to, go over a long enough period of time, we know that the property values have increased at a much faster rate than any of these numbers, and therefore we look as though we're really swimming in it, but we're not, because you still can't go to the grocery store with your property value.
Yeah. You had indicated that a lot of this, the fact that we're managing to get by is predicated on growth, town growth.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, do you have an idea as to, I mean, I've been here for a long time, and I have seen persistent growth, but I've also heard in many quarters that the available land is at a premium. I'm sure there'll always be something available, but how much more growth is it? How much more can we depend upon growth here in Burlington? It seems to me that it has...
Every time a house is knocked down and a larger house is put on a lot, that's growth. Every time a new apartment building goes up.
But is that going to carry us, do you think? I mean,
Well, to answer that question, if you look at the ratio of the commercial versus residential values in town, it used to be that the residential values were on the order of 55–60% in our time living in this town, and the commercial property contribution to the tax revenues was something on the order of 40% or less, and it is now 62% from the commercial property elements, and it is 38%, and it is changing rapidly with all the changes that are taking place from the large organizations and the large developers in town. It is still growing, and as Steve pointed out, I think that there's close to 40 houses being torn down and being rebuilt, and every single one of them is between 2 to 3 times the value. And so when you start looking at that as growth, and it's really not growth, in the sense that you have a significant population increase or a significant change in the overall makeup of the town, certainly not in acreage available. We still are a leading center of parking lots. So when you start messing around with them, I heard today, for example, that there's going to be a 3rd phase of the Keurig complex. Well, that's a big operation. And if they're going to add another parking garage and a few other things of that nature, there will be some more jobs associated with it, etc. So we're getting to the point where our growth is measured in how many jobs we provide rather than how many people live here. And right now it's close to 50,000 jobs and 25,000 people live here. And the growth is the number of folks who live in those apartments and have young children in those apartments. That's where the growth is. And it's not very, I don't know what the population was when you here. When I moved here in 1971, it was 22.5, something like that.
I believe
It's now 25.
Now
That's
it's
not
25.
big growth.
Yeah. When I moved in, I don't think it was any more than 15,000, 16,000.
So you predate.
Yeah, it go way
But
back.
you know, you
And
have
I've seen a lot of change.
You have a very good point. As a resident, you know, you look around, you say, aren't we saturated? Haven't we
Yeah, that's the
maximized
impression
out,
I get, that we are saturated.
how much our infrastructure can handle? And I would have thought the same thing.
Yeah.
That, but look around.
Yeah.
I mean,
Up
things
and down
continue to
every
go
street.
in. Every week there's something new.
Yeah, yeah. I seem to recall last September, Adam, jump in whenever
All
you
right.
want. I don't
Yep.
mean you're.
No.
I seem to recall last September that there was a resolution, a warrant article that requested, if I remember correctly, that the selectmen phase out the health care benefits or change them. I can't remember exactly. What happened to that? Do you remember offhand?
Oh, absolutely. Can I have slide 8? Basically, the resolution was, and this was proposed by Pat Angelo. I guess I can say that because it was
Yeah.
said in public.
Yep.
But it was
On 3 different occasions, 1998,
okay.
2007, and now.
and basically the resolution was to phase out health care benefits for part-time elected officials that receive essentially small stipends. And by law, they're eligible to receive that if the town deems to do it.
Can you define what a part-time elected official is and who they are? What positions, for
Yes.
example?
Can I have slide 9, if you would? Okay.
This is all common terminology for us, but I just
Yeah.
want to make sure the viewers at home are following.
Okay. These are actually the individuals
Okay.
that have opted to basically select health insurance and are currently getting health insurance as part-time elected officials. So it includes the selectmen, it includes the planning board, it includes as eligible, it includes the town moderator and a couple other part-time elected officials, but that's the type of official it is. And so right now, it is, if you look at this, it costs us in 2015, I think that was, a total, no, that's 2013, I have those numbers, a total of $158,000. If you go to the slide before that, slide 8, you'll see that basically this shows you 3 years of data. For between 214 and 216, it's gone from 123,000 to 164,000 a year. And this is with 9 active officials opting to take the benefit. There are over 30 officials that are eligible. If all of them
Wow.
took that benefit, that number would be 480,000 a year.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Wow.
Now, you asked previously what are other towns doing. Almost all, in fact, 75% of the towns and cities in Massachusetts have eliminated this benefit from their budget. They no longer basically allow part-time elected officials that are working less than 20 hours a week on the average to basically take health care coverage where the insurance is paid for 70% or 80%.
So
by the town.
we're in a category pretty much by ourselves at this
Well,
point.
we're not by ourselves, but we're
Right.
in the minority.
In a minority. Okay.
Now, this was raised. Basically, our motion asked the selectmen to look into this issue and to basically phase it out. The selectmen had 2 or 3 meetings on it since that September issue was raised, and then the most recent one was I think it was in January.
Yes.
And basically, they decided not to discuss it. A motion was raised. The motion wasn't seconded, and therefore there was absolutely no discussion, and things stay as is, essentially with no reasonable discussion on the issue. No reasons for, no reasons against.
Can you recap what the motion was? Because the motion wasn't to outright phase it out either. It was sort of a compromise version that was motioned to the floor.
Well, it was suggested that things stay as they are for 2 years to allow people to change. Now, This year's budget number for this particular item is going to be around $185,000 because there's some additional people on it now who opted to go into the program this year because they were eligible. And the other thing is that it was always a relatively modest amount of money. Nobody noticed it running into six figures, etc. But the point is that this is only 2% or 0.2% of the budget. And you'd think, well, why make a fuss about this? And there's that old saw is that if you carefully look after the pennies, the dollars will follow. And I think this is one of those things. This is the smallest portion of the discretionary spending that we do. And by discretionary spending, is that we spend more than we need to by law. The rates are significantly different than they need to be. They are apportioned on a percentage basis, but they're not an equal benefit to all employees because the employee says, I need this company rather than that one, and there can be a factor of 2 difference in the rates. That doesn't sound particularly fair. It should be an equal amount, and there are ways of going about doing that. Even though it's small, I think that, not to put words into Steve's mouth, but we both thought that this was a way to engage in the overall broader issue of healthcare costs for the town. And if you start with the smallest, most obvious one, then it becomes easier to get into the more difficult ones. We were wrong so far. It's easier to deal with the big ones. Top-down is an easier conversation because you need the state legislature to weigh in, and they're not about to weigh in. On OPEB, for example, to me, it's logical to argue with the setting up these OPEB things that they suggested towns get prepared to do. That's nice for them to say, but if it doesn't have the weight of legal authority, if they're not willing to act and tell us precisely what we want, why should we? We're perfectly capable of meeting our unfunded liabilities on an annual basis. Therefore, they're not unfunded, and we shouldn't be putting away this uniquely funded savings account, which is not available to us.
There are arguments that I've heard people say of why we should have this part-time elected officials.
That's right.
And why we should, have that benefit there. And basically one of them is that we need it to get people to run for office, okay? And another one is, well, these are valuable people, they do a good job, and they should be rewarded.
They come to Burlington for the insurance.
Now, I don't understand why 75%, that isn't the same case in 75% of the other cities and towns. I would think that we would be better if we want to reward them, raise the stipend a little, and provide them an increased benefit. The
and perhaps call it an honorarium instead of stipend if that gets you around the law.
Well, I don't know that would do that, but with the elected officials, if you gave them a little bit more, that would be a way around it. Plus, now you wouldn't incur this, and it's not just the elected officials; their families are eligible. They're eligible to take the family plan. This is a tremendous cost, and in some cases, they're even eligible to retire on it.
Oh,
it's a great benefit.
It's absolutely a great benefit.
Benefit.
And it is not commensurate with the job, and so. The selectmen asked the various boards that are eligible, to give them their thoughts back. Only 3 individuals responded out of all the boards, out of the 30 that are eligible. There's not a lot of interest in that case.
How many years?
2 for, 2 1 against.
How many years does someone have to be vested into the plan to continue to draw on it in retirement?
I'm not familiar with exactly what the requirements are, but there are 3 people I know that are currently on the retirement plan. I think it's at least 10 years, but I'm not sure.
You have to actually, I think the rules now are that you actually have to be an employee. In other words, meet that 20 hours per
No, I think
week.
they do that by there's a given amount, is what I heard. That threshold if you have to earn this amount.
But it is making,
okay.
they're making it more difficult in most towns and I agree with Steve that just by increasing the honorarium and getting rid of that eligibility clause is a perfectly useful thing to do, to say thank you. I think that that's all it really is.
And again, the argument I feel, an argument that I heard in favor of keeping the status quo was that the town's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But that really doesn't take into it. You always have a saying, I've heard you say many a time on town meeting, that each one of us represents 65 households, roughly.
Roughly,
And of those households, how many are in a distress situation?
27.
27 of them. So I think that fails to address that 27 households per town meeting member that we represent.
Now, that brings up an entirely different aspect of this. So far, we've been talking about rates, costs, and you can rationalize this on an average basis that we're doing quite well. As soon as you start talking about the affordability of this to the current taxpayer, range of incomes, etc., instead of the proportion that this is of property values and how it compares, or how much of the overall bill is paid by the commercial. And now we start entering into another socioeconomic discussion that argues an entirely different thing. We need about 4 or 5 shows to talk about that
gentlemen
aspect
are always
alone.
welcome.
So you really don't want to get there.
I'd like to show one more slide that shows this in the big picture.
Yeah.
Slide 4, if you would. And basically, this shows basically what's been happening over the last 15 years with respect to cost of living and Burlington taxes. Basically, I took an average taxpayer by the name of me, okay?
Okay.
And I plotted my taxes over the last 15 years. And that's that blue line. And that has, now the red line is the federal cost of living and how that's increased. Well, the cost of living has increased by about 40% over the 15 years. The taxes have increased 2.5 times that to 3 times that.
Wow.
Now, what I didn't show on this, because I didn't look at it till just recently, is that if you look at Massachusetts wages, the average wage in Massachusetts, okay, that's increased 20% over this time period. That's half of that red line.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so I don't understand how people are going to keep being able to pay for this.
Yeah.
I mean, the equation doesn't add up.
Little by little, the
Yeah.
the basic costs of necessity are going to eat into any discretionary household income that anyone has
Right.
at some point.
You're going to be looking at people trying to move out, and I have heard that there is a little bit of that now, that people
Can't afford to move
can't be-
and can't afford to stay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Steve was asking me a question the other day, and I spent a few minutes looking this up. The average income of people who live in Massachusetts in 2008 was almost $72,000. And in 2011, it was $66,000. And in 2014, I've heard a number of about 62. I haven't got a source for it yet, but this was from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. The median income, household income for Burlington is $95,000 in 2014. And if I look at the school teachers or the school committee staff, not committee, the entire school department staff, the average income is $81,260. But if I apply this healthcare benefit the way the American enterprise economists value I add another 19% for it, because that's the number that the state of Massachusetts puts a premium on public sector employees over private sector employees. and that ends up being $95,000, which is pretty close to the median income, which says that that you can look at these numbers and overread into it and saying that, well, the public sector and the private sector are about equal.
Does that
In
factor
Burlington.
pensions?
Pardon me?
Does that factor pensions?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's a fallacious argument by picking a few numbers like that. Thing that's important here is that the overall income is going down while the income for the public sector employees has been going up. And when I add that on a 1-to-7 basis, because that's roughly the proportion we're talking about for state and municipal employees to private sector, it means that the income for the private sector people out of this 62 or 63,000 in Middlesex County, in Massachusetts, is really dropping quite a bit more than that, because the 15% of that is actually still increasing. How much it is, I don't know, but those are scary numbers when you start getting into them, and that's where we get into the big, long discussion about affordability of taxes, even though they look as though they're reasonable, health insurance, et cetera, et cetera.
How will the stagnation of growth in the private economy affect the public sector in the long term? It obviously has a net effect.
That's where a lot of the money comes from, is the bottom line, to pay our taxes.
I know that. I'm just making sure our viewers at home understand that.
Yeah, that's pretty simple.
Do you have,
The fact of the matter is that the local budgets have never gone down that I know of. There may have been some modest adjustments where the tax bill looks as though they dipped for a year or two, or mostly a year that I can remember in almost 50 years. But it's been a steady increase. And that comes from growth in property values and growth in other things, as we discussed before, rather than just population growth that the nation's economy basically depends on. You have more people, they generate more of a fraction to the GNP, and we can't really say that about here. We survive basically well because we got 50,000 people come here to work. And that's 62% of our tax revenues is what makes us feel good, but if we had to pay our real fair share on some equitable basis, we'd be surprised how much bigger it would be.
speaking of fair share, what do you think we should, if we were to, if the selectmen were to follow through, what do you think a fair share would be for the current people? And I often wonder about these people who are elected. Do they stay because of the health benefit?
They will all say that they don't take those
Yeah, of
jobs
course, I
because of
know.
the health benefits. So I've never heard anybody, any elected officials say that they're taking it. However, no question about it, from the town employee standpoint, that's a big plus.
No?
So where do I think it should go? I mean, first of all, there are constraints on where it can go. Those constraints are not immovable. The first constraint is the percentage is governed by union contracts. Okay, those contracts can be renegotiated. That takes time, then they should be renegotiated. Secondly, there's a 50% minimum in the state law. That can also be changed. And so that's something that we should be looking at in the longer term.
And maybe faster than the union contracts.
Maybe faster than union contracts if the state is better than our federal government. And so, in my gut feel, I think we should be down in the 30%, 25% range. What do you think, Ernie?
It's hard for me to get away from the fact that the Medicare system is based on a 50-50 arrangement, but it's also easy to accept a lower number than that, because we know that the Medicare system is not all that healthy as far as how long it can continue to spend a lot more than the 50-50 cost share. It has to be increased. But if it is still going to be a 50-50 and they change the upper limit of contributions to no upper limit, as it probably should be, then I think if that system looks as though it's being, quote, saved, then I'm still comfortable with a 50-50 cost share as an employee versus, and that's an enormous change from what it is now. There's been some small changes in the right direction, I think, but the other thing that's happening in the private sector is increasingly the amount of coverage that you get is a zero cost share from the employer.
Wow. That's a big difference.
That, I don't know how you repair that, and now we're looking at the 83% of the population that has lost something. Do you get rid of it entirely? Ultimately, what's fair as far as I'm concerned is whatever is available in the private sector is what should be available in the public sector as well. There should not be a difference between the two. And if you make some changes to the Affordable Care Act, I can actually see how that could happen. Instead of companies providing insurance like they don't want to, then towns shouldn't provide it. It should come through some overall government entity. For example, Colorado is talking about a single insurance company in the state. That's very close to single payer.
Wow. Yeah.
I'd like to
ahead.
put up some recommendation because I know time is getting a little short.
Yeah.
And so if I can see slide 10, and also I'd like to just to put this in perspective. Adam, you asked, why hasn't it changed, and why aren't people looking into this? And so at least one reason is because our selectmen and our town meeting members aren't hearing from their constituents, you, the taxpayer, that this is a concern. And so if they don't hear from you, they basically say, well, there are no concerns, why should we do anything? And that's exactly what's going on. And so with respect to the recommendations, we've looked at this, and basically, one is we should reduce cost share. I'm not saying what the value is that we should go to, and it probably is a step process, but we need to start that. Two, we need to eliminate the part-time elected official benefit. And we need to relook at the stipends. Three, we really should look at a system where the town payment is the same for all employees on health insurance, not a percent of whatever plan they want. In other words, if somebody wants a more expensive plan, why should the town pay more for that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Than they should? Why shouldn't those employees be treated equally?
Yeah.
Now that's a radical thought from what's happening today, but in fact, that someplace where we should look at.
That has the potential of reducing the town's health costs by something approaching 20% by itself.
Wow.
Just treating everybody fairly, because if you look at the way the town has to purchase services, it's always the low-cost bidder. There is a low-cost level among the plans that are offered from 4 different companies. And the lowest cost provider right now, which I happen to have, is also rated one of the best plans in the country. So I'm not being shortchanged by having the lowest cost option, but that's 20 to 30% lower than the other options. Why? Well, now you start getting into the affordability and who's providing the healthcare services, why is Partners Healthcare much more expensive than the others, and so on, and you get into things that you really can't control. But you can control a baseline rate that you're going to do your cost sharing from, and that should not be the maximum, it should be the minimum level.
From our point of view.
No different than buying engineering services that we have for building a school.
How does the Affordable Care Act come into all of this? How does it impinge upon, or does it?
To me, the most important thing that it does for people in our age group, not so much Adam's, is
He's still a young
even
man, so.
even if you look at a policy that as a supplemental policy for Medicare, you find a statement right up front that says you are limited to $3,400 out of pocket, even at a 0 premium rate. That means basically that the chances of going bankrupt because of very large medical costs virtually disappeared.
Right.
And when you start looking at a whole bunch of plans with that in place, you can start looking at self-insurance. And I know there are people in town who prefer the zero premium plan because they self-insure the first $15,000. That's what it translates to for the average user of medical facilities in our age group. That is the single biggest thing because it affects quite a few millions of people.
Yeah.
There are similar benefits that are more difficult to uncover, but we're going to get some understanding of them as we go along, and there are going to be some changes.
Yeah.
We got to have you guys
have
back
to-
again
yeah,
very
we have
soon
to-
because we can
We
keep
have
going.
to, yeah. 2 minutes? No.
No
Where
minutes
am-
now. 2 seconds.
2 seconds. Don't forget to vote BCAT, your favorite program.
Burlington
okay?
Beyond. a
Burlington and Beyond, yes. And I want to thank these two gentlemen, and I hope you've learned a lot, and they will be back. We will continue this discussion. Thank you very much for
And thank
attending.
you for having us. It was enjoyable.
Thank you.
And